Libby. Well, thank you so much, Libby, for being here.
My pleasure.
Libby and I were reminiscing because we worked together at Vista Cove and Rancho Mirage when Libby was the registered dietitian there, and she used to come with her dog, which was always a big hit. And Lucy received her education from, she's a local person from San Diego State University. She got her degree in nutrition and then went on to get her master's degree at Tufts in Boston, and came back to the Valley and has worked at 2 out of our 3 hospitals, JFK, Eisenhower, was an adjunct faculty staff at College of the Desert for 40 years, which is hard to believe as I look at you, Lucy. So, but Lucy has started her own business now, and she also has a show on PBS, and she'll be telling us a little bit about that now. But I loved your line when you sent us your info that food and nutrition isn't just about the body, it's also about the brain. And of course, you know, that's one of the focuses that we have at Alzheimer's Coachella Valley. So good morning, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Oh, you're very welcome, and I appreciate that introduction. I'll correct you. This happens to me all the time. Lucy's my dog was my dog's name. I'm Libby.
Right. Oh,
yes,
sorry.
And I know that was a slip of the tongue, but it brought back a funny. When I was consulting at Palm Springs Healthcare, there was a very demented woman who was just adorable. Her name was Elizabeth. I remember that because that's really my name. And her daughter came in one time, and she calls me over. Oh, come here. And she goes to her daughter. She goes, "This is Lucy," pointing to the dog. And she looked at me and she goes, "And who are you?" And I looked at the daughter and said, "I'm Lucy's mom," and that's what was important because she remembered Lucy. So anyway, that's happened to me a lot. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. I have a few slides just kind of to remind me about a few topics, but I'm a lot like Dr. Cole. I'd rather answer your questions than lecture at you. And so there's a few things on the slide just so I know I'm hitting some things, but for the most part, we can do questions and answers. And I thought that this initial slide was actually very apropos to what we're talking about and the message I'm gonna try to relay to you guys. So why is this not going here? Well, now we have technical difficulties because there we go. And so, you know, a lot of times I use this title for my talk because I think it's so apropos. You know, I'm giving you information or food for thought, but really most of us should be eating for the health of us, the health of it. So, you know, there's the big question, and the question even today, we're two-pronged here. What's the best diet to maintain our brain, but also then what's the best diet for those we give for? Because there is a time, and we're going to get into that, where I think it's more important to feed the soul than the body. I'd say we always feed the body and the soul. And there comes a time where it's more important to give those comfort foods and the foods that we like than it is to try to prevent a decline. So, you know, in the past, we've always focused on, are you getting enough calcium? Are you getting enough vitamin D? Are you getting enough of this or that? And then we hear conflicting stories about, well, you know, last year they said we needed more calcium, and then this year a study came out and said people that take calcium supplements, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't help, say, with bone fracture. And you can go through every nutrient and you can get that same issue. what we're discovering, and I think in the next few years you're going to see, is that researchers are now looking at the whole of the diet. Nutrients work better together. And when I'm teaching at COD, my nutrition class, I explain it to the students like this. I said, basically, all the nutrients we eat are like a symphony orchestra. And when it's well-tuned, it works beautifully. But what happens if you overemphasize one nutrient? All you have is you have twice as many or 3 times as much many horns, like trumpets, and you don't have any flutes. That symphony doesn't sound so good. So in our diet, it's important to understand that foods work together in a ratio, and they work to enhance and sometimes detract from each other. And this new way of looking at how we're eating is called a food matrix. How does the food, the nutrients in whole foods, how does that react in our body, not the individual nutrient? And I think that's really important, because we've been trying to dissect things, and it's not that simple. So I put some pictures in, because this is actually an eggplant, a baby eggplant that I took it from my garden. I have a huge vegetable garden. So as you go through, you'll understand that I really do practice what I preach about eating more vegetables. And here are the things that we do know in general about a healthy eating pattern. I do not believe there's one way. I don't believe that vegan is the only way, or vegetarian is the only way, or paleo is the only way. You know, we hear all this and it's like, oh my goodness, what diet should we eat? Well, we're all a little different, and we need to do what works for us economically, health-wise, time-wise, all those other considerations. But we do know sugar is not our friend. Every study that comes down, the more refined sugar you have, the more sodas, the more desserts, the more processed foods where they hide a lot of sugar, we know those diets don't make us healthy, and they actually take away from our health. We also know that obesity kills, and as a dietitian, as much as I don't like what's going on with COVID, that it's affecting so many of us, and that it's so horrible, when they came out with this huge revelation that people that were obese were more susceptible to COVID and you know, the horrible outcomes, I went, well, why is that such an earth-shaking revelation? I've seen that in my entire 45-year career of being a dietitian. People that are overweight do not even respond to treatment as well. In our society, we're getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And you can look at the statistics year by year, or 10 years by 10 years, and we're not getting better. We've tried all these diets. We have all this diet food and all these sugar substitutes. It's not working, because we're relying on over-processed foods, and we're eating twice as many calories probably that my grandmother did. And that was brought to light to me when my daughter, who's now 35, was making corn muffins from my grandmother's Joy of Cooking cookbook, and it said it would make 12 muffins. And so I took out a muffin tin, and it barely made 6. I'm going, oh my gosh, in 1920, muffins must have been half the size. So we've just supersized everything. In my opinion, and the opinion of many experts, vegetables are Mother's Nature gift of health. The more vegetables you can get in any shape or fashion, cooked, raw, just as long as they're not gooped up with a lot of creamy sauces, the better. And I think we all need to spice up and herb up our lives. Many of the spices and herbs have a lot of just subtle benefits that if you use them throughout, they actually enhance or magnify the nutrient power of those foods that you're eating. We need to eat a rainbow every day. The different colors in foods actually have health prevention type properties. That's why the push for vegetables and some fruits is that that's where we get the color in our diet. And the other thing to remember, though, is each one of us is very wonderfully unique in our nutrition needs. So that's why I don't think there's just one diet. This is not out of my garden, but I love the picture because it exemplifies the types of foods that we all should be headed towards. Now, this is a slide I borrowed from a seminar that I went to, and these are the 4 diets or diet patterns that have been proven to have health effects. The DASH diet is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and it's been studied, and I actually use it in my private practice because it's a very researched, beneficial way of looking how one might eat, with the whole grains on the bottom, and then fruits and vegetables. I always want to change that around. I want to say vegetables and fruits because you need to be eating more vegetables than fruit. And then it goes up, but you see that things like even meat, it's low, it's a lean meat, not prime rib. And the sweets are way up on top. It's a little itsy bitsy amounts. And then the Mediterranean diet in the past few years has got, again, a lot of popularity. And you look at people near the Mediterranean that eat this traditional diet, you see that they live longer as long as they haven't been industrialized and adopted the McDonald's lifestyle that we have. And I don't mean to pick on McDonald's. I could say Burger King or Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever. But again, the base is plant-based. And then as you go up, it's some meat, poultry and seafood. So it again is the basis is plant-based. And then the flexitarian diet, which is basically vegetarian, but allowing little itsy bitsy amounts of maybe most of the flexitarians I deal with, it's fish and chicken, not so much meat, and they reserve it. So when they go out to somebody's house for dinner or whatever, they don't feel guilty about eating whatever the hostess is serving. They just might not take seconds of the meat, but and if it's hamburger, they'll have a hamburger, but put a whole bunch of vegetables, lettuce and tomato and everything on it. So that allows for flexibility. Again, though, the bottom of that pyramid are plant-based. And then over the past few years, research has combined the DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet. And I think I read someplace where somebody who follows the MIND diet strictly has between a 35 and 53% chance of preventing cognitive decline. Look at where we are. We're getting to Libby's version of things, because the real base is the dark green leafy vegetables in general, and then fruit. And then what they don't include are the nuts, seeds and nuts. And I would kind of put those in the third tier there, or maybe split the oils and the seafood and add the nuts, because they are very good for you. And they're telling you, and again, grains aren't there, but when you look down the fine print, it says food groups to focus on are green leafy vegetables, berries, nuts, olive oil, whole grains, fish, beans, poultry. And this is the only one that says wine. And of course, that's wine in moderation, 1 glass, not a whole bottle. So this is out of my garden, and I wanted to show. I love that picture. Food doesn't have to be complicated. It's simple. The basil's out of my garden. Those are tomatoes out of my garden. And, I put that on the table. We had guests that night, and they just went, whoa, And all I did was serve it with a little olive oil and balsamic vinegar, and it was all gone. It was the first thing that was gone in the meal. So it's not like you have to make a big fuss and muss. And I am blessed because I do like to garden. I got that gene from my father. And I take a great deal of pride of being able to make a whole salad from my things from my garden, or to do something like that. So basically the moral of this story for all of us, whoever we are, and whatever our health needs are, because we're all dealing, some with hypertension, some with diabetes, some with heart disease, all this fits into all of this eating pattern. And so eat more dark green leafy vegetables. You know, I'll throw in a handful of spinach in my scrambled eggs. It doesn't take any more effort, and I'm getting a little more there, you know. Berries, and then I might add / and then the next one down would be melons probably. Mushrooms are just an amazing medicinal, they provide a lot of stuff. Legumes and beans. And you can get those in cans at the store, and then I would suggest that you rinse them so that there's not as much sodium. I have an Instapot, so I'll make a whole pound, and then I have a big freezer so I can Ziploc bag them and throw them in the freezer and take them out when I need. Nuts and seeds, onion and garlic, again, are very medicinal for many things. Tomatoes, and your crucifer vegetables, those are the gas-forming vegetables. A lot of people don't necessarily like them because of that. Kind of depends on your own tummy. Turmeric is one of those spices that has been very well studied, and it turns things yellow. So if you want rice and you add a little turmeric to it, you've got yellow rice, which adds a little color, especially if you're having fish that night. And if you had rice, then that would add a little color. And teas. Now, this isn't the only thing, but those are, kind of right off the top of my head, what would be some of the things you'd want to focus on, and maybe make sure that when you're shopping, you have those. And eat with caution. I'm not saying don't eat them. What I'm saying is those are the occasional things, or the things you eat in very small amounts. And sugar and artificial sweeteners top the list. We've had artificial sweeteners for years, and it hasn't helped with the obesity problem at all. And in fact, there's studies showing that artificial sweeteners change your bacteria content in your intestines, and that bacteria content is absolutely important in keeping you healthy and keeping in a good immune system. So, and what I'm saying is, look at the peanut butter and get the peanut butter that doesn't have sugar at it. And look at maybe the marinara sauce that you're buying, and get the marinara sauce that reads like a recipe and not a chemistry experiment, and doesn't have sugar in it. Be cautious with alcohol. We do know that wine, and it's not just red wine, white wine also has some amazing phytonutrients in it. But we're talking a glass. We're not talking, again, half a bottle or a bottle. Fried foods. When we heat foods at a high temperature, they tend to produce chemicals that are especially carcinogenic. So, a baked potato would be better than French fries. White flour whenever possible. You want to eat foods the way Mother Nature grew them, and she didn't grow white flour, she grew whole grain. Processed meats, mainly because of some of the additives and preservatives and the sodium. Any kind of soda. You don't want those artificial sweeteners. I actually, when I go out and that's the only drink, I prefer having a regular soda to the artificial sweetener. At least, Mother Nature made sugar cane and sugar beets. Commercial baked products. And this is just one of, it's on the list, but one of my tricks a long time ago is, even to help with my weight, I decided I wasn't going to eat anything that wasn't homemade. Number one, the homemade stuff tastes better. And number two, it's not as available. So if there wasn't as much, temptation to eat a whole bag of cookies because if I wanted a cookie, I had to make it. Grain-fed meats, there are, and the grass-fed meats are more expensive. But again, if you look at those models I just showed you, you're only supposed to be eating a little bit. I think I'm the only person in Palm Desert that's fed 4 people on a half a pound of ground beef in chili. You know, I doubled the beans and added a little beef so there was some floating around, and everybody thought they were getting normal chili and they didn't know the difference. So high sodium foods are another thing, and high sodium foods are very closely related to overly processed foods as well. This is one of my favorite dinners. It's just roasted vegetables, and it's pretty to look at. This was before I cooked it. It's even pretty after you cook it. But usually right before I go to the grocery store, I look at what vegetables I have left over. I call them the vegetables that need a home, cut them up, either season them with lime juice and cilantro, or use a balsamic vinegar and olive oil and garlic, and pop them in the oven for about 20 minutes. And the nice thing about this is they're great the next day, cold in a salad or heated up. So you can make a lot and it goes a long way. So the trauma is that so many of us that are taking care of people have split nutrition goals. We have their needs and our needs. And that's an issue that I don't think that anybody has a real answer for. That's something you have to answer on an individual basis. I will give you some examples of some things that I ran into in my own life. I had a grandmother when I was in high school that had dementia. They didn't even, Alzheimer's wasn't even a name, but it was some kind of dementia. And my mother, she wouldn't eat. Now, grandma was a 4'11", and when she didn't want to do something, she might have said, well, been 7 feet tall. You couldn't get her to do it. And my grandmother was a teetotaler, and my mother felt guilty about putting Kahlua in the insure because my grandmother liked coffee, and she just loved that coffee-flavored milk. And my mom asked me, is that, I feel guilty about it. And I go, Mom, if it gets grandma to get some nourishment and it gets her to have some fluid that she wouldn't normally have, I said, how much Kahlua are you putting in? She goes, oh, maybe an ounce. I go for it. Just go for it. So you have to make those decisions. And then I recently married my husband, even though I've known him since 6th grade. And when we got back together, he was taking care of his mother that had Alzheimer's. And we had to consider things like, Mary didn't have teeth, and there were foods that Mary didn't like and couldn't chew, and all of those kinds of things. So when we fed her, that was a consideration. So this is all where the individual's needs come in. And as a caregiver, you need to remember that your nutrition needs are as important as those you care for. If you aren't on the top of your game, you're not going to be able to give them the best care possible. You also have to remember that those that you care for, their needs are as important as yours. So sometimes it's a dueling need here. And that's tough. That is really tough. And so on the limited time you have to cook food, you have to balance or create a way to get there, to get to an endpoint that is a happy compromise at least. And for those you care for, their needs change hour by hour practically. I know when I was trying to feed my mother-in-law, in the morning, she'd drink juice for me. In the afternoon, she wouldn't drink anything. That was one of our big things, is hydration with her. And it's like, I'd offer orange juice. I don't want that. Water. I don't like water. And so I had this variety of fluids, that we offered. And, sometimes for us and the ones we care for, there are conflicting nutrition concerns. They might be getting pickier and pickier about what they will accept, but also have diabetes or heart disease or whatever. So you're juggling that. And that's my father, who I took care of at the end of life, had prostate cancer. He wasn't, I think he was coherent till the second he died. But when I started taking care of him, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he's got congestive heart failure. He's got diabetes. How am I going to do that? And then I realized if I couldn't do it, nobody could. But it was still a struggle for me. So the struggle is real. And I guess you have to acknowledge it and do the best that you can do. These are, this was a picture I found, but I do grow these. They're called flame carrots. I just love them. I think they're so pretty. And sometimes just by making the food interesting and making it visually nice, that helps all of us. And vegetables are so colorful, you can do that. So here's some of my time-saving things. And again, it all depends on your situation and what you can do. Make sure you have standard pantry items and freezer items that are always stocked. And throughout my life as a caregiver, from my children to my father and my mother-in-law, those pantry items changed. But I always, my dad was so funny because I was just starting a new business, teaching at College of the Desert, and taking care of him. And I'd walk into his house for dinner because we'd have dinner together with Lucy. He loved Lucy. And I'd look at him, I said, Dad, we're having a 20-minute meal today. Because I got done working and had to go teach at 7 o'clock. And so he knew, number one, he knew not to bug me about things, that I was going to be in the kitchen cooking. And so Lucy took care of him. And I had some standard meals that only took me 20 minutes. Another thing is when you cook one meal, count it for several leftovers. I will, it's just as easy, at least in my opinion, to make spaghetti sauce, 3 batches, and then freeze things into one batch or one or two people's servings, as it is to make one batch of spaghetti sauce. But that gives me several meals that when I'm busy, and now I tell my husband it's not a 20-minute meal, it's a freezer meal, and he understands what that means. And if necessary, use some time-saving things. Personally, I would rather get my vegetables out of my garden. Most people don't have that luxury, and right now I don't even have that luxury because it's too hot, nothing's growing. And so I go to the store and get loose produce. But if you need bagged and pre-cut produce from the grocery store or my favorite store, Trader Joe's, that's better than no vegetable at all. Frozen vegetables are great. They have highly nourishing, and you can if you get the bags, you can take out just what you need and put the rest back in the freezer, and you don't have the potential spoilage factor that you would have with fresh vegetables. So there's, go down the line and get the best that you can get. And even if it's a real problem, if you can't pre-make some meals, then maybe considering there's several healthy delivery meals where it either comes pre-cooked or everything's chopped and stuff, and you just do the actual final cooking. That might be an idea, even if you do it only 1 week a month and put those in the freezer and have them for your 20-minute meals or your freezer meals. So there's things that you can look at. My biggest problem is, you go from feeding a young husband to having children, and I had a son. My daughter didn't eat that much, but a boy growing up, you're cooking extra stuff, and then all of a sudden there's just 2 of us, and it's like, how much lettuce do I need? How many? Sometimes I think I'm nuts at the grocery store because I get 1 zucchini. you know, because we're having zucchini one night, or one zucchini and yellow crooknet that I put together. And that's why I buy the loose produce, because I can get one or two of what we need, just as much as Sam and I will eat. Here's the deal. Never forget you're feeding the body and the soul. And there does come a time in our life where we need to play well, I can't, I'm tongue-tied. We need to worry about the soul food. And even though my father was diabetic, and granted, again, he wasn't demented, but didn't have Alzheimer's, but there were things he needed to have in his life. He needed to have some of the recipes my mother cooked, because that was very emotionally important to him. He needed to have his mother's bourbon balls, even though he's diabetic, at Christmas time. And he was perfectly happy with only having 2 and waiting until I brought 2 more over. But he needed to know that I made them and he could eat them. So and the best present I ever gave my father was, I looked back in that darn Joy of Cooking cookbook, found a chocolate cake with walnuts that his mother made for every birthday from the time he was a young child until she died. And and it had that marshmallow frosting, homemade on it. And I made him that, and he actually cried. He said, "This is what my mother made." I said, "Yes, it is." And he goes, "Can I have 2 pieces tonight?" And I said, "No, Dad, but I will send you home with a piece." And because he loved stale cake with milk on it the next day, and you can have a piece tomorrow. And he was perfectly happy with that. So, you know, sometimes you have to bend the rules. So I'm the dietitian that fed my diabetic dad chocolate cake. And towards the end, when he was on hospice, he and Lucy shared a bowl of chocolate ice cream every night when I was doing the dishes. And we were all happy and calm and content. So the whole point is, there might come a time where soul food is far more important than feeding the body, and it's okay. I don't think food should be a fight. I don't think it should be a fight with young children. I don't think it should be a fight with as we grow older. You keep in mind that hydration is really important, and after hydration, my choice would be calories do count, but sometimes any kind of calories are more important than no calories at all. So I'm going to leave. Hopefully I left enough time for all your questions. This is the one thing growing in my garden. We're growing watermelon. And as you can see, my 4-year-old grandson helped us pick the first watermelon. He thought he could carry it in, but it was about 25 pounds. So his 9-year-old brother helped him. And this was right before we cut it, so he could taste the watermelon that he saw from a seedling to its fruition. I think that's important in teaching kids. And there's just a little more information. So I'll stop sharing the screen and I can answer any questions. I'd be happy to stay on as long as you have questions.